A brief update. It's May the 12th, 2024. I've released just 2 episodes of this year. My father-in-law passed away in January. He bravely fought a multitude of health issues for well over 15 years. Rest in peace, John. My wife of more than 20 years, Lisa, is remarkably strong, much more so than I. Her outlook on life is always positive and has motivated me to resume my passion project. Research for new episodes is now well underway. Stay tuned and sincere thanks for subscribing to my podcast.
The whole NBL for supporting us on this tour. This is our 3rd one, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it tonight. Thank you for your support. Appreciate it.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So we're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Grant, you make the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 136. Thanks for joining me. Today, my recap of the 3rd and final show of the recent No Bull Tour that took place here in Australia, featuring Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, and Luc Longley. For greater context, a link in the show notes opens a YouTube video I made to accompany the audio. A wide range of photos spanning the players' careers and footage from the end of the show when we were given the green light to record the Bulls trio on stage. Show notes for this episode and access to a huge archive of past episodes are available at inallairness.com. Now, onto the show. The No Bull Tour featured the trio of Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, and Australia's own Luc Longley, a collective 13 NBA championship rings. Pip and Horace were teammates for the Bulls' first three-peat, 1991 to 1993, and Luc and Pip were teammates on Chicago's second three-peat, 1996 to 1998. The tour was hosted by talented Australian actor, writer and comedian Shane Jacobson. 3 cities were on the itinerary. The tour commenced in Hobart on February 23, 2024 at MyState Bank Arena. Next stop was Melbourne's Margaret Court Arena on February 24. The final stop was at Sydney's Darling Harbour Theatre on February 27. A criticism often heard in this part of the world, whether discussing concerts, sporting events, speaking tours, or even from overseas holidaymakers, invariably relates to a lack of cities visited. Australia is a big country, making it extremely difficult to satisfy the want for more destinations on the schedule. Case in point, I live in Coffs Harbour, a 6-hour drive north of Sydney. I flew down to attend the final show of the tour. Eternal thanks to great friend of the podcast, Luc Longley. Luc very kindly had me on the guest list and set me up with a ticket to the show. An absolutely fantastic view of the stage, front and centre. Now, let's quickly separate fact from farcical fiction. A who's who of the cringeworthy NBA social media landscape offered ludicrous condemnation of Pippen, Grant and Longley, with barely a word spoken by the trio. Largely erroneous reports the tour would be nothing more than a stage for Scottie, Horace and Luc to unleash on Michael Jordan. Supposed revenge for the way they were portrayed in 2020's wildly popular Netflix series The Last Dance. In Luc's case, the way he was not portrayed. Pleasingly, since remedied by ABC Australia's wonderful Australian Story feature. At the time of recording this audio, the complete One Giant Leap documentary is closing in on a staggering 6 million views on YouTube alone. Parts 1 and 2 were released the fortnight before that and have amassed more than 1 million views of their own. The Sydney show, as I believe was the case for Hobart and Melbourne, opened with a video montage of the 1990s Bulls on the big screens, before a recreation of the iconic 1990s Chicago Bulls introductions. The lights were switched off, and a Ray Clay-esque voiceover boomed throughout the theatre as Luc, Horace, and Scottie appeared to the musical stylings of the Alan Parsons Project's Sirius, a most fitting way to open the show. Luc said it had been the best part of 25 years since they had the opportunity to hang out together as a trio. The night began with a discussion of each player's early years and exposure to basketball. Scottie talked about being one of 12 children. He fell in love with basketball and dreamt of playing in the NBA. Those humble beginnings drove him to be the best he could be in order to help his family. Largely overlooked throughout his college career, where he grew 5 inches after his freshman year, Pip continued to believe in himself and earned invites to numerous NBA pre-draft camps following his senior season at Central Arkansas. Horace spoke about his journey. He was raised in a small town in Georgia. His parents both worked 2 jobs and did their best to keep food on the table. However, Grant elaborated that it wasn't unusual for him to go deer hunting in efforts to help feed his family. Luc elaborated on his alternative upbringing in Fremantle, Western Australia, a stark contrast from that of Scottie and Horace. If you haven't already watched the excellent Australian story feature on Luc, One Giant Leap, I implore you to watch it on YouTube. It details his life extremely well. The conversation transitioned to 1987, where Chicago famously orchestrated an NBA draft day deal that sent number 5 pick, Scottie Pippen, to the Bulls via the Seattle Supersonics. 5 picks later, at number 10, Clemson's Horace Grant was also selected by Chicago. Fairly or otherwise, even with a young Charles Oakley on the roster, the Bulls were considered a one-man team prior to the key arrivals of Pippen and Grant. The pair reflected on the impact of Oakley, their mentor, prior to his trade from Chicago to New York after the 1988 season. Horace told a great story about then-coach of the Bulls, Doug Collins, in the wake of Oak's trade. Doug advised Horace he'd soon become the Bulls' power forward. Horace said he'd never been so nervous in his life and started eating whole chickens and hot dogs to gain weight and get stronger. He also credited Bulls' strength coach, Al Vermeil, who worked closely with him to get stronger and be the on-court protector that Jordan and Pippen needed. This led to a discussion of the Bulls' battles with the NBA's Motor City Bad Boys, the Detroit Pistons. In 1988, 1989, and 1990, the teams would meet in the playoffs. Each time, Detroit were victorious. The Pistons ultimately won back-to-back NBA titles in 1989 and 1990, frustrating the Bulls' efforts to climb the mountain for Eastern Conference dominance. We were then treated to a video montage of the Bulls' successes from 1991 through 1993, their first three-peat. Great highlights and music to really get the crowd and the guys on stage fired up. Pip talked about the 1991 NBA Finals versus the LA Lakers, specifically the Game 2 adjustment where Bulls coach Phil Jackson switched Scottie defensively onto Magic Johnson and its impact on the series. The Bulls won 4 straight games after losing the opener in a nail-biter. Horace added that Pip's defensive prowess on Magic was the turning point of the series. He called Scottie one of the best defensive players to ever play basketball and one of the main reasons the Bulls won their first title. At this point, Longley described the value of Pippen on the Bulls. As coincidence would have it, Luc attended one of the 91 Finals games in Los Angeles. He'd recently finished his college career in New Mexico, had recruited an agent, and was in LA to sign the paperwork. He hadn't seen an NBA game in person and was stunned by how hard the players hit one another. He was captivated by the squeak of the sneakers on the floor, how high above the rim players leapt, and quickly realized the huge increase in intensity that would be required for him to succeed at the highest level. Shane asked Scottie about the 1992 Olympics and the enduring impact of the Dream Team. Pip said practice was very competitive and it was the kind of team he wished he could play for throughout his whole career. The discussion moved to the closing moments from Game 6 of the 1993 NBA Finals, Chicago Bulls at Phoenix Suns. John Paxson's title-clinching three-point shot. However, there was another crucial play after that. The Suns' last-ditch effort to force a seventh and deciding game. Horace Grant stood tall and came up huge, rejecting Kevin Johnson's shot attempt just before the buzzer, rendering the Bulls' three-peat complete. Shane briefly asked Horace about his memories of the late, great Kobe Bryant. Grant won his fourth championship ring as a teammate of the legendary Black Mamba on the LA Lakers. He described Kobe as a top 5 player of all time and a true student of the game. Luke relayed a story about the Chicago Bulls' video room. Coach Phil Jackson would often display items of significance on the walls. I'm paraphrasing here and likely won't do justice to the story, but it's worth a shot. Apparently, a young man decided to go on a pilgrimage of sorts to a Tibetan monastery. He had to walk for days in the wilderness to get there. He was almost there, nearing the top of a mountain in Tibet, when a monk emerged from the forest, obviously walking the same trail but in the other direction. The young man's thinking to himself, "This is great, my first monk experience." He gets closer and then realizes the monk is wearing a Chicago Bulls hat. The young man took a photo of the monk, which would ultimately wind up in the hands of Phil Jackson. The Zen master put the photo on the wall of Chicago's video room as a reminder that no matter where you live in the world, people were always watching this team. That story stuck with Luke some 3 decades later. The Bulls had a responsibility to play beautiful basketball. Luke briefly mentioned his recent trip, January 2024, back to Chicago for the Bulls' Ring of Honor ceremony. Whilst there, he had a video crew that documented his travels, filming what I believe will be called a love letter to Chicago. Look forward to seeing what comes of that. The next discussion topic was the breaking news of Michael Jordan's first retirement in early October of 1993. Pip talked about a sense of excitement and how everybody came into their own. The team didn't lose confidence. There were new players in Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc, and later in that 1994 season, via a trade from Minnesota, one Luc Longley. Horace talked about Pippen filling the shoes of MJ to become the Bulls' leader. Horace and Scottie had been through so much together as best friends and teammates since being drafted in 1987. Horace knew that Pip was ready for the job. Paraphrasing again, he said Scottie would always put his arms around teammates, gave them support and made them better players and ultimately better people. He mentioned how Scottie placed 3rd in the regular season NBA MVP voting, was named MVP of the 1994 All-Star Game, and helped both him and BJ Armstrong to become All-Stars that same season. He rates Pip as one of the best leaders of all time. Luke said on his arrival to Chicago, he'd never been around a player of Pippen's caliber, therefore didn't know what to expect. On Scottie's leadership, I remember he said, quote, "He used a bit of stick and a bit of carrot," end quote. He clearly demanded a lot of his teammates. Luke wanted to make his teammates happy, and he wanted to impress Pippen. He said that if he was having an off game, it wouldn't be unusual for Scottie to approach him with that golden voice and tell him to slip a pick or similar, and he'd hand Luke the ball. Pippen basically read how players would likely unfold and then involve his teammates to lift their confidence. Next, on the big screen, we saw Scottie's amazing dunk over the New York Knicks' Patrick Ewing in Game 6 of the 1994 Eastern Conference semifinals. Shane asked Scottie what he said to Spike Lee following that dunk. Pippen replied, "I just asked him to sit down," and that had the crowd laughing quite loudly at the time. Shane asked about Phil Jackson's influence and whether he was the greatest coach ever. Pippen said he was a great coach and a great mentor. He could tell immediately when Phil joined the Bulls that he was on a mission to be an NBA head coach, and what he loved most was that Phil was a player's coach. Horace said Phil is the greatest coach ever. He never discouraged players from being who they were as a person, and Horace shared a great story about Phil calling him into his office one day early in Horace's Bulls career. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but Phil says, "Horace, I need to ask a favour of you." And Horace said, "What's up, Phil?" He replied, "I'm going to be yelling at you. Horace is like, okay. Phil adds, however, I won't be directly yelling at you. I'll really be directing my emotions to Michael and Scottie. A bewildered Horace responded, what do you mean? Phil says, well, I can't yell at Mike and Scottie directly. Horace says, okay, Phil. Okay, I got you. The funniest part, though hard to describe in this setting, is that Horace thought this would just be for one season. He then went to say that 6 years later, circa 1993, Phil was still yelling at him. This anecdote received great laughs from the crowd. The discussion then moved to Michael Jordan's NBA return in March of 1995. Horace had signed as an unrestricted free agent with the Orlando Magic 6 months earlier, thus ending his Bulls tenure. That said, far from ending his link with Chicago's second three-peat, as Horace was a vital member for the Magic for the next 4 seasons. Pip mentioned MJ's "I'm back" statement that went worldwide on Jordan's return. Luke talked about how it was a whole nother level of pressure to have Jordan join the team. He was struck by Michael's, quote, carnivorous, end quote, approach to every moment of practice. Luke said he respected Jordan for it, but it certainly wasn't fun. A topic that Luke expands on considerably in One Giant Leap. Horace reminisced on returning to Chicago as a member of the Magic. He prepared his new teammates, Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Nick Anderson, and Dennis Scott, to name a few. He knew Jordan's mindset. Horace was very confident Orlando would compete with the Bulls. They did more than that, stunning Chicago in 6 games in the 1995 Eastern Conference semifinals. Unfortunately, Horace wasn't granted an opportunity to expand on that series, as talk moved quickly to the Bulls' second three-peat. Understandable, due to time constraints, but it would have been great to hear Horace elaborate further on that monumental Game 6 in Chicago. We were then treated to video highlights of the Bulls' 1996 through 1998 title runs, a great primer for the next discussion topic, Dennis Keith Rodman. The mere mention of the worm elicited laughs from some of the audience. Luke discussed his time with Dennis. He said that he learned a lot from the worm, however, not all of it was good. A fantastic teammate who simply wouldn't take players off. Shane asked Luke what it felt like to be the first Australian to win an NBA title and not being home here in Australia to celebrate it. Luke said that he basically returned to Australia after his retirement from the NBA, finally having an opportunity to live his youth, so to speak. He did things he always wanted to do, raising his family, surfing, building boats. After that, he just lived his life until the last dance happened, at which point Australia collectively asked, "Where's Luke?" He then started to feel the love. That morphed into what became the terrific Australian Story feature, and since then Luke has enjoyed the opportunities presented to him. Shane threw out a blanket question. Who is the GOAT, the greatest of all time? Luke quickly said it was Michael Jordan. Horace directed the question to the audience, but didn't definitively name anyone. Pippen said that basketball is a team sport. There are definitely great individual standouts, but he doesn't see a greatest of all time. Rather, he sees the greatest team of all time, referring likely to his 1996 Chicago Bulls, the 72-10 team. He is hoping the No Bull Tour delivers a sequel. It'd be fantastic to see more 1990s Bulls players join Luke here in Australia. Who would you like to see on a future tour?
So Larry Kesselman and the whole NBL for supporting us on this tour. This is our 3rd one, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it tonight. Thank you for your support. Appreciate it.
Special thanks once more to Luke for making my night in Sydney extra special. An incredible experience to meet him, Scottie, and Horace. Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Tap the microphone icon on my website to send me a voicemail. There's also a link in the show notes to easily send a text message. You can suggest discussion topics, or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. Worldwide, the show has 204 ratings on Apple Podcasts, with an average of 4.9 stars, with 101 reviews across all providers. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my free NBA history newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming episodes, future guests to appear on the show, and more. Sign up via my website or simply email me inallairness@gmail.com. You can follow my show in various ways. Search In All Airness, 3 words, on your listening app of choice. The show is available on most platforms. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with a great range of guests. Join me next time for another edition of the show.